The rancher buried his wife's lover, then found her crying over the wrong grave. He believed that this land, these animals, and the life he had built were enough to keep him content. But lately, a storm had been brewing, one he could feel even if he could not see it. It started with small things. A letter left on the kitchen table that didn't belong there. A note tucked into a drawer, written in a familiar hand, but folded in a way that suggested secrecy. At first, John tried to ignore it, telling himself that maybe he was imagining things. He had been married to Martha for 15 years, and he had never doubted her love. She had been the heart of their home, the one who kept the ranch running when he was out in the fields from dawn until dusk. But something about the way she looked at him lately, the way her laughter seemed a little forced, made him uneasy. Then came the small absences. Martha would say she was visiting a friend in town or running errands, but the timing never seemed to make sense. She would come back later than expected, her clothes slightly disheveled, her smile just a little too quick. John tried to brush it off, telling himself that she might be tired, that everyone needed a break sometimes. But he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The town didn't help. In a small place like theirs, news traveled faster than the wind through the fields. John began to notice glances from neighbors, whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, and a subtle shift in the way people looked at Martha. It was as if they knew something he didn't, something that was supposed to remain hidden. At first, he wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but he was a man of quiet pride. He preferred to see for himself, to gather the truth before acting. One evening, the feeling of unease became too strong to ignore. John decided to follow Martha. He waited until the sky was painted with the soft oranges and purples of sunset, then climbed onto his old truck, careful to stay out of sight. He followed her slowly down the winding country roads, past the barns and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. His heart pounded, not only because of what he might find, but also because of the fear of what it would mean for his life if his suspicions were true. Martha's car turned off onto a narrow dirt path that led to the old Miller farm. John kept his distance, hiding behind a line of trees as he watched her approach the back door. She knocked lightly, then entered, closing the door quietly behind her. From his hiding spot, John could hear muffled voices. One of them was undeniably Martha's, soft but full of laughter. The other voice was unfamiliar to him but carried a tone of intimacy that made his chest tighten with anger and hurt. He watched in silence for what felt like hours, hidden among the trees, until finally the voices faded and Martha emerged alone, brushing leaves from her coat. She looked around nervously, then drove back home as if nothing had happened. John's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Every step of her walk, every glance she cast over her shoulder, confirmed what he had feared all along. She was involved with someone else. The next few days were a torment. John could hardly work on the ranch. Every sound, every shadow seemed to remind him of the betrayal. He tried to act normal in front of Martha, but the tension between them was thick, like a rope pulled taut. Martha noticed, of course, but John refused to speak, to give her the satisfaction of knowing he had discovered her secret. Instead, he spent his time thinking, planning, and trying to understand how someone he loved so deeply could hide such a thing from him. He remembered the early days of their marriage, when life had been simpler, when love seemed effortless. He thought about the promises they had made, the dreams they had shared while standing under the wide, open skies of the ranch. And he wondered how those dreams had shifted, how Martha had allowed herself to drift away without him realizing it. The anger and hurt inside him grew like a fire, warm but dangerous, threatening to consume everything he had built. John knew he had a choice. He could confront Martha immediately, demand answers, and risk a fight that might destroy their family. Or he could watch and wait, gather more evidence, and confront her when he was certain he had the whole truth. Pride, anger, and heartbreak battled inside him, each urging him in a different direction. But John was a patient man, a man used to planning for the long days and long nights on the ranch. He chose patience. That night he could not sleep. He sat on the porch looking out at the stars, the cool wind carrying the scent of hay and earth. Memories of better times haunted him, mixing with visions of what he had seen. He felt like a stranger in his own home, like the life he had known was slipping through his fingers. The stars, usually a source of comfort, seemed cold and distant, and yet beneath the anger and the hurt, there was a small spark of determination. John promised himself that he would not be a victim of betrayal. He would find a way to face the truth and deal with it on his own terms. Over the next week, John became more observant. Every interaction Martha had, every phone call, every letter he stumbled upon was examined with careful eyes. He learned that the other man was named Ethan, a neighbor from a nearby farm. Ethan was younger, charming in a way that made it easy to see why Martha might be drawn to him, but John could not forgive the secrecy, the deception, and the betrayal. Each detail John uncovered was like a stone added to the weight in his chest, pressing him down with the burden of anger, sadness, and confusion. The town, meanwhile, continued to murmur. Farmers and neighbors stopped by the ranch under the pretense of casual visits, their words light but their eyes heavy with unspoken questions. John felt the pressure building. His private life had become a topic of public curiosity, and the humiliation only added fuel to the fire inside him. He knew he could not act hastily, yet the desire to confront Martha, to demand answers and justice for the betrayal, was almost unbearable. One evening, John decided he needed to talk to someone outside the family, someone he could trust. He drove into town and visited Sam Reynolds, an old friend and fellow rancher. They sat in Sam's kitchen, the smell of coffee and fresh bread filling the room, and John told him what he had seen. Sam listened quietly, nodding, offering no judgment, only a steady presence. He advised John to be cautious, to think before acting, and to remember that the choices he made now would affect the rest of his life. Returning home, John felt a mix of relief and tension. Talking to Sam had helped him organize his thoughts, but it had also made the situation more real. He could no longer pretend that it was a fleeting suspicion or a misunderstanding. Martha's betrayal was real, and he would have to face it sooner or later. John watched Martha that night from the kitchen window as she moved around the house, unaware that he was observing her. Her movements were familiar, but now they seemed strange, almost foreign. He wondered what she was thinking, whether guilt had started to creep into her conscience, or whether she was still caught up in her secret world with Ethan. The uncertainty gnawed at him. The ranch, the land, the animals, all the things he had loved so much, suddenly felt small compared to the storm brewing inside the house. As the night deepened, John sat alone in the living room, the flickering light of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. He thought about his options, about what he might do next. The anger, hurt, and betrayal were strong, but beneath it all there was a quiet resolve. He would confront this situation with careful thought and deliberate action. He would not let the pain of betrayal destroy him. The ranch, the land, and even Martha were part of his life, and he intended to face whatever came next with the strength he had cultivated over years of hardship and labor. And so, John Harper waited. He watched, he thought, he planned. He did not know what the coming days would bring, but he knew that life on the ranch, the life he had built, and the person he thought he knew best, Martha, would never be the same again. The seeds of conflict were planted, and soon they would grow, shaping the fate of everyone involved. The days following John's discovery were heavy with tension. Every morning he woke with a knot in his stomach, wondering what Martha was doing and whether Ethan would appear again. The ranch, which had always been a place of calm and routine, now felt like a stage for secrets and hidden emotions. John moved through his chores mechanically, feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and checking on the fields, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene he had witnessed at the Miller farm over and over. He could not ignore the pain and anger building inside him. Martha's betrayal had cut deeper than he imagined, and it was hard to reconcile the woman he had loved for years with the woman who had sought comfort elsewhere. He remembered the first time he had met her, her laugh echoing through the barn where she had come to help deliver calves. She had been full of life, full of kindness, and he had fallen for her instantly. That memory now felt like a ghost, a reminder of a happier time that seemed almost impossible to reach again. John tried to act normal around Martha, speaking to her about chores, finances, and the ranch's daily needs. But every word felt strained, every glance seemed heavier than it should. Martha noticed the change immediately. She tried to meet his eyes to smile and reassure him, but John's silence was like a wall between them. The more he said nothing, the more she felt the weight of his suspicion pressing down on her. One afternoon, when the sun hung low and the shadows of the barn stretched across the field, John decided it was time to confront her. He had spent days thinking about it, weighing his words and the possible outcomes. He wanted answers, he wanted honesty, and most of all, he wanted to understand how their marriage had come to this point. "Martha," he said quietly as she folded laundry in the kitchen. His voice was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of tension. "We need to talk. I know there's something you've been hiding, and I need you to tell me the truth. It's true I've been seeing someone else, Ethan." "Why?" he asked quietly, the single word carrying a lifetime of betrayal and confusion. Martha hesitated again, then looked down at her hands. "I don't know," she admitted. "It started small, I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt lonely, and I thought he understood me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time." He had always thought they shared everything, that their life together was enough. And yet here she was, confessing that she had looked for something else outside their marriage. The hurt was deep, but so was his love. He wanted to cry, to scream, to shake her until she understood the pain she had caused, but instead, he took a deep breath and listened. For hours they spoke, carefully, cautiously, trying to navigate the fragile truth that now lay between them. Martha explained her feelings, her doubts, and her moments of weakness, while John asked questions he had longed to ask, seeking clarity, seeking closure, seeking some way to make sense of the situation. The conversation was painful, each word a knife cutting through their shared history, yet it was also strangely necessary. After the confrontation, the house fell into a heavy silence. They moved through their daily routines like strangers, each lost in thought, each haunted by the new reality. John found himself outside more often, walking the fields, tending to the animals, trying to calm the whirlwind in his mind. He thought about revenge, not in the dramatic sense, but in a way that would assert control over his life, over the betrayal that had been forced upon him. But the idea of hurting Martha or Ethan directly made him uneasy. He was a man of principle, even if anger clouded his judgment. Despite his restraint, John's thoughts often returned to Ethan. He imagined him at the Miller farm, laughing, talking to Martha, touching her in ways that made John's blood boil. He hated him, yes, but he also hated the part of Martha that had sought him out. The anger was raw and relentless, a fire that seemed to grow with each passing day. Martha, meanwhile, tried to regain a sense of normalcy. She moved quietly through the house, avoiding John's gaze when possible, hoping that time and patience might heal some of the wounds. But she could feel the tension in every corner of the ranch, in the way John walked, in the way he spoke, in the way he watched her. She regretted her actions deeply, yet she struggled with the consequences of her choices, knowing that repairing trust was a road that would take far longer than a simple apology. One evening, John made a decision. He could not live with uncertainty any longer. He had to know the full extent of the affair, to understand the relationship between Martha and Ethan completely. So he followed her again, as he had done before, staying hidden and observing. He drove slowly along the country roads, keeping a careful distance, heart pounding, mind racing. He watched as she stopped at the Miller farm, where Ethan was waiting. This time he heard their conversation clearly, heard their laughter and the casual ease between them. Each word, each gesture, felt like a betrayal layered on top of the first, and John's resolve hardened. That night he returned to the ranch, tired but determined. He realized that he had reached a crossroads. He could continue living in suspicion and quiet anger, or he could take action, confront the situation fully, and decide the future of his marriage and his life. The choice weighed heavily on him. He loved Martha, he truly did, but trust had been broken in a way that could not be ignored. John spent the next few days reflecting on what he wanted and what he was willing to do. He knew that anger alone could not guide him. He needed a plan, a careful approach that would allow him to face the betrayal without losing himself completely. He walked the fields, the wind carrying the scent of hay and earth, thinking about his options. He thought about forgiveness, about confrontation, about whether there was any path back to the way things had been. Finally, he decided to speak with Martha again. This time, he would not let fear or anger control him. He would ask the questions that mattered most. He would set boundaries and he would seek a way forward, whatever that might look like. When he approached her, she could see the determination in his eyes, the quiet intensity that had always been part of him. She realized that the conversation they were about to have would change everything, and there was no turning back. "Martha," he said calmly, though his voice carried weight, "we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets. I need to know the truth, everything, and then we will decide what comes next." John's confrontation had opened a door, one that could not be closed, and they were standing on the threshold together, ready, or at least forced, to face whatever lay beyond. The ranch, once a place of comfort and routine, had become a battleground of emotions, secrets, and difficult decisions. John and Martha were caught in the tension of love, betrayal, and the need for understanding. Each passing day added weight to the choices they would have to make, and though the path forward was unclear, one thing was certain: their lives, their marriage, and their hearts would never be the same again. The tension on the Harper ranch had reached a breaking point. John Harper could no longer focus on the ordinary routines of farm life. Each sunrise, which once brought comfort and peace, now seemed to cast a harsh light on the betrayal he had discovered. The air felt heavier, and even the wind seemed to whisper of secrets and anger. John's mind, once steady and calm, now swirled with thoughts he could barely control. Every time Martha entered the house, he noticed small details. The way she moved, her hurried glances toward the windows, her nervous touch of the wedding ring that no longer seemed to fit her heart. It hurt him deeply to see her like this, torn between the life they had built and the life she had chosen outside their marriage. The love he had once taken for granted was now a source of pain, twisted by deceit and betrayal. John's anger toward Ethan was growing. He found himself imagining confrontations in his head, rehearsing what he might say, what he might demand. The anger was not just for himself, but for the home they had shared, the promises that had been broken, and the dreams he had nurtured alongside Martha. Every time he saw Ethan's face in his mind, the heat of fury and the sharp sting of betrayal made it difficult to think clearly. One afternoon, after hours of tending to the cattle in near silence, John decided to take action. He couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer, couldn't tolerate the thought that Ethan might continue to see Martha without consequence. John was not a violent man by nature. He had spent his life raising animals, repairing fences, and managing the rhythms of nature, not people's secrets. But the situation demanded action, and his emotions were a storm he could no longer ignore. He began planning carefully. The Harper Ranch had many hidden corners, small areas behind barns, under trees, and near the creek, places where one could go unnoticed. John knew the land better than anyone. He considered each option, weighing risk and consequence. It was not about pride, he told himself. It was about protecting the life he had built, the family he had tried to preserve, and the respect he had for the promises he and Martha had made. John decided to lure Ethan to the ranch under a false pretense. He sent a message, casual but convincing, asking for help with the fences near the north pasture. Ethan, always confident and unaware of the depth of John's knowledge, agreed. He arrived the next morning, cheerful and unsuspecting, unaware of the tension coiled like a spring in John's mind. When Ethan stepped onto the property, John greeted him politely, masking the storm inside. They shook hands, exchanged brief words about the fences, and began walking toward the north pasture. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the field. The cattle moved slowly nearby, unaware of the human conflict unfolding so close to them. John's heart pounded, not just from anger but from fear of the unknown. He had planned this carefully, but nothing about the situation was simple. Once they were in a secluded area, away from the main barn and the house, John confronted Ethan. The conversation started calmly, almost politely, but the tension was palpable. "I know about you and Martha," John said, his voice low but firm. "I know what's been happening and I need answers." The anger and betrayal that had built up inside John for days could no longer be contained. "Don't lie to me," John said. "I've seen enough. I know what's been going on." The anger and hurt that had been simmering finally erupted. In the heat of the moment, a struggle began. Words turned into shoves, shoves into grapples, until suddenly, Ethan stumbled backward and fell against a rock. Time seemed to slow for John. Ethan lay on the ground, unconscious, blood trickling from a cut on his head. The reality of what had just happened hit John like a wave. He had never intended to hurt anyone this badly. He had wanted answers, perhaps to scare Ethan, perhaps to make him understand the pain he had caused, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. Panic gripped him. John quickly assessed the situation. Ethan was not moving, and John feared the worst. He realized he had to act fast, but his mind was clouded by fear, anger, and confusion. He looked around the secluded area, trying to decide what to do. The ranch had hidden spots, and one of them, near a cluster of old oak trees, seemed far enough from the house and neighbors. With trembling hands, John carried Ethan's unconscious body, every step heavy with guilt and fear. When John reached the hidden spot, he dug a shallow hole with a spade he kept nearby for farm work. The soil was hard and sweat ran down his face as he worked, each shovelful of earth feeling heavier than the last. He laid Ethan carefully into the hole, covering him as best he could. His mind was spinning, a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. He had crossed a line he could never take back. Afterward, John stood in the clearing, breathing heavily, looking at the spot where he had hidden Ethan. The silence was deafening. The wind rustled the leaves, the cattle lowed in the distance, and the world seemed to continue as if nothing had happened. But for John, nothing would ever be the same again. He had acted in anger and desperation, and the consequences of that moment would haunt him forever. Returning to the house, John felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Martha was inside, unaware of the full extent of what had just happened. She noticed the tension in his eyes, the sweat on his face, the way he moved. "John, what's wrong?" she asked, worry in her voice. He forced a calm exterior, brushing off her concern with a vague explanation about hard work in the fields. But inside, John knew that this was only the beginning. He had made a decision in the heat of emotion, one that could not be undone. He had crossed a boundary, taken a step into territory from which there was no return. The ranch, the house, and even his marriage would never be the same. He could not undo what had happened, and he could not escape the weight of his actions. In the following days, John struggled to maintain normalcy. He tended the cattle, repaired fences, and went about the routines of ranch life, but the secret weighed heavily on him. Each glance at Martha, each casual question, each movement in the house reminded him of the choice he had made, the line he had crossed, and the life that had been changed forever. Martha, meanwhile, continued her daily routines, unaware of the full truth. She sensed that something was different, that John was carrying a burden, but she did not know its depth. She noticed his quiet moments of tension, the way he stared into the distance, lost in thought, and the subtle changes in his behavior. Her heart was filled with guilt for her own actions, and she struggled with the realization that she had brought them both to this point. John spent many nights sitting on the porch, staring at the stars, the cool wind carrying the scent of hay and earth. He thought about the life he had known, the choices he had made, and the path that lay ahead. The anger and hurt had not disappeared. They were still there, simmering beneath the surface. But now they were joined by a new, heavier emotion: fear. Fear of what might happen if anyone discovered what he had done, fear of losing the life he had built, and fear of facing the consequences of his actions. As the days passed, John realized that the situation could not remain hidden forever. Every choice, every action, every moment of silence added weight to the secret he carried. He knew that one day, the truth would have to be confronted, and the decisions he had made in anger would come to light. For now, he could only move cautiously, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while carrying the heavy burden of what had occurred in the secluded clearing behind the oak trees. Despite the fear and guilt, John also felt a strange sense of control. He had acted decisively, taken action, and made a choice that no one else could undo. The consequences would come, but for now he had done what he thought was necessary to protect his life, his ranch, and the memory of the home he had built. And so, life on the Harper Ranch continued, outwardly calm but inwardly charged with tension, secrets, and unspoken truths. John and Martha moved through their days with careful steps, each aware that the balance of their lives had shifted forever. The events in the secluded clearing were a turning point, a moment that would define the rest of their lives, and though the world seemed unchanged, nothing would ever be the same again. Days passed on the Harper Ranch, but the quiet of daily life was only skin-deep. Beneath the surface, tension and fear lingered, twisting every interaction. John Harper moved through the fields, tending the cattle and repairing fences, but his mind was never fully on the work. Every step, every sound, reminded him of what had happened in the secluded clearing behind the oak trees. The memory of Ethan lying there, motionless, haunted him, mixing with the anger and betrayal he still felt over Martha's affair. Martha, meanwhile, was restless. She tried to focus on the household chores and her usual routines, but her mind kept wandering. She missed Ethan in a way that was both painful and confusing. She regretted what she had done, but she also felt drawn to him, unable to fully reconcile her feelings with the life she had shared with John. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the bedroom, she would think about Ethan, imagining what might have been, while the walls of the ranch seemed to press in on her, reminding her of the choices she had made. One morning, Martha decided to go for a walk along the far edge of the ranch. It was a quiet, secluded area near the creek, a place where she often went to think and breathe when her mind felt heavy. That morning, she carried a small bundle of flowers, the kind that grew wild along the banks. She told herself it was for reflection, a simple act to honor someone who had been important to her. She did not know it, but John was watching her from the barn, careful to remain unseen. As Martha walked slowly, she came across a shallow mound of earth just off the path near the creek. She paused, a sense of curiosity mixed with sorrow washing over her. There was something about the mound, small and unassuming, that drew her in. She did not know whose grave it was or why it had been placed there. All she knew was that she needed a place to pour out the emotions building inside her: guilt, love, and grief. She set the flowers down on the mound, letting them scatter in the gentle breeze, and knelt beside it, her hands trembling. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered Ethan's name. The sound of it carried softly on the wind. She remembered the laughter they had shared, the long conversations in secret, the moments of closeness that had seemed so natural and yet so forbidden. The emotions were overwhelming, and she felt a hollow ache in her chest, a mix of sorrow for what had happened and longing for what could never be. John, hidden behind the barn, watched the scene unfold. His heart twisted in unexpected ways. On one hand, he felt a sharp, almost physical pain seeing Martha mourning for Ethan. On the other hand, he realized that the mound she had chosen was not the place he had buried Ethan. In the chaos of the moment, in the panic of covering up the accident, he had buried Ethan in a slightly different location, marked only by the faint disturbance in the soil. The irony and weight of the situation hit him like a wave. Martha's grief, though genuine, was directed at the wrong grave. He felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief, because the secret of Ethan's actual resting place remained safe for now. Dread, because he knew that this new twist added another layer of complication to an already tense situation. Martha's emotions were raw, and seeing her like this, completely unaware of the truth, filled John with guilt, shame, and an almost unbearable sadness. For hours, Martha remained at the mound, talking softly to the earth, her tears soaking the soil. She spoke of regrets, of mistakes, of love lost and promises broken. Her words were a mixture of apology and longing, a testament to the emotional complexity of her situation. She had come to the ranch seeking closure, seeking a way to make peace with her actions, and yet unknowingly she was mourning in the wrong place. John finally moved closer, unable to stay hidden any longer. He stepped out from behind the barn, his presence startling Martha. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, unsure whether to be angry or grateful for his attention. John approached slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Martha," he said softly, "you don't have to do this alone. I needed to feel something, anything, to help me understand why all of this happened." He could see the pain in Martha's eyes, the rawness of her emotions, and he knew that no words could fix what had happened. All he could do was sit with her, silent but present, sharing the heavy space between them. As the afternoon sun shifted, casting long shadows across the creek, John began to reflect on the chain of events that had brought them here. The betrayal, the anger, the struggle with Ethan, and now Martha's grief over the wrong grave. All of it was a tangled web of emotions, choices, and consequences. He realized that there was no simple solution, no easy path forward. Every action they had taken, every secret they had kept, had created a ripple effect that could not be undone. Martha continued to speak, softly at first, then with more intensity. She spoke of regret, of fear, of longing, and of love lost. She admitted that she had made mistakes and that she did not know how to make amends. John listened, understanding that she was struggling with the same emotions he was, though in a different way. He felt a mixture of sympathy and frustration, knowing that the truth he carried could never be revealed without changing everything forever. As the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped toward the horizon, John and Martha remained at the mound. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, the gentle rush of the creek, and the soft hum of insects settling in for the evening. It was a quiet, heavy moment, one that would linger in their memories for years to come. They sat together, connected by grief, guilt, and a shared history, yet separated by secrets and unspoken truths. Finally, Martha stood, brushing the dirt from her hands and gathering the flowers she had brought. She looked at John, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I have to move on," she said quietly. "I can't stay here forever. I have to find a way to live with what I've done." We carry the past with us, even as we try to move forward. That night, John sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars above the ranch. He thought about the choices he had made, the line he had crossed, and the unexpected twist of Martha mourning at the wrong grave. The situation was more complicated than he had ever imagined, and the weight of it pressed down on him, heavy and unrelenting. Yet beneath the guilt and fear, there was a quiet resolve. He would face the consequences, one way or another, and he would do what he thought necessary to protect the life he had built, even if it meant living with the secret forever. In the following days, the routine of the ranch continued, but the tension remained. John and Martha moved through their chores carefully, each aware of the invisible weight that hung between them. Their conversations were measured, polite, but always shadowed by the knowledge of what had happened and what remained hidden. The memory of Martha kneeling at the wrong grave, the sorrow in her eyes, would linger in John's mind, a reminder of the fragility of trust, the consequences of betrayal, and the complexity of human emotion. The Harper Ranch, with its wide-open fields, gentle hills, and flowing creek, remained a place of beauty and life. Yet beneath the surface, it had become a place of secrets, grief, and quiet tension. John and Martha had survived the immediate aftermath of betrayal and anger, but the path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they could not yet see. The wrong grave, the misplaced mourning, was a symbol of the confusion and pain that now defined their lives. And as the stars shone over the ranch that night, John realized that life would never return to the way it had been. Every choice, every hidden action, every moment of grief would shape the future, and there was no turning back from the events that had brought them to this point. The story of the Harper Ranch and of the lives intertwined within it had reached a turning point, one that would define the rest of their days. The Harper Ranch had never been quieter, yet the silence was heavy with unspoken truths. John Harper woke early as he always did, but the morning light felt sharper, almost accusing. The days had passed since Martha had cried over the wrong grave, and the image of her kneeling there, grief-stricken and unaware, haunted him more than he expected. He could still see the wildflowers she had laid gently on the mound, still hear the soft whisper of Ethan's name carried on the wind. That memory had become a weight he could not set down. John had tried to resume the routines of ranch life. The cattle needed feeding, the fences needed repair, and the fields demanded constant attention. But each task, once a source of satisfaction, now felt like a distraction from the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He moved mechanically, his hands steady but his mind restless, replaying moments of the past weeks in a loop, discovering the affair, confronting Martha, the struggle with Ethan, the burial, and Martha's heartbreaking vigil over the wrong grave. Each memory brought its own pang of guilt, anger, or sorrow. Martha, too, was changed. She moved quietly through the house, careful to avoid showing the turmoil in her heart. Her days were filled with chores, errands, and small tasks around the ranch, yet her mind was rarely at rest. She tried to pretend that grief was enough to make amends for the betrayal, that tears could wash away the past. But she knew, deep down, that some wounds were permanent. She often caught herself staring at the horizon, lost in thought, wondering whether life could ever return to normal. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the fields in shades of gold and orange, John made a decision. He could not continue living with the secret of Ethan's fate. The burden of guilt pressed on him like a physical weight, and he realized that keeping the truth hidden was unsustainable. He needed to confront the consequences, to acknowledge what had happened, and to decide how to move forward. He found Martha in the kitchen, quietly preparing dinner. Her hands shook slightly as she chopped vegetables, a faint shadow of the grief she carried still lingering in her eyes. John took a deep breath, trying to steady his own voice. "Martha," he began, "we need to talk, about everything. There are things I need to tell you, things I can't keep inside any longer." She looked at him with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and apprehension. She could feel the seriousness in his tone, and a chill ran down her spine. "John, what is it?" she asked softly. He gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, moving to the small wooden table that had seen years of family meals, laughter, and arguments. John sat across from her, hands folded, trying to summon the courage to speak the words that had been trapped in his chest. "It's about Ethan," he said quietly. I didn't plan for what happened, and I never meant for it to go as far as it did. But he's gone, Martha. He's dead." Martha's hand trembled as she reached for her glass of water, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Dead," she whispered, her voice barely audible. How did this happen?" He told her about the confrontation, the struggle, the accident that had occurred in the secluded clearing, and the burial. Every detail was difficult to speak aloud, yet necessary. He watched Martha's face closely, noting the mix of shock, sorrow, and guilt that crossed her features. When he finished, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Martha buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. I never wanted this," she said between sobs. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing." He had acted in a moment of rage and desperation, but he also knew that Martha had made mistakes. They were both human, flawed, and vulnerable, caught in a situation that had spiraled far beyond control. After a long silence, John spoke again. "Martha, I need you to understand something. What happened cannot be undone. The past is gone, and there's no way to bring it back. But we still have a choice. How we live with what's left, how we move forward from this. We rebuild slowly, carefully. The ranch, our lives, our marriage, it won't be easy, but it's the only way we can survive what happened." Martha admitted her mistakes fully, taking responsibility for the affair, and John acknowledged the weight of his own actions. They argued, they cried, they sat in silence, but slowly, a fragile understanding began to emerge. Despite the heavy emotions, the ranch itself seemed to respond. The cattle moved calmly, the fields flourished, and the sun rose and set in predictable patterns. Life, in its stubborn persistence, continued around them, a reminder that the world did not stop for human mistakes. John and Martha, too, learned to move with that rhythm, finding small moments of peace amid the chaos of their emotions. One evening, John led Martha back to the secluded clearing behind the oak trees. He pointed to the faint disturbance in the soil, the place where Ethan's body truly rested. Martha stared, her breath catching in her throat. The realization hit her hard. She had been mourning at the wrong grave, pouring her grief into a place that held no body. The irony and sadness of the situation brought a fresh wave of tears, but also a strange sense of closure. John knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's important to face the truth," he said quietly. "No matter how painful, it's the only way we can heal. We can't change what happened, but we can learn to live with it. And I need to find a way to forgive myself and maybe forgive us both." Over the following months, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. The ranch remained their home, the cattle their responsibility, and the fields their connection to the past and future. But the Harper household had changed. John and Martha's relationship was marked by honesty and careful communication. Trust had been broken, but they worked each day to rebuild it, acknowledging the past while focusing on what remained. Martha found solace in her daily routines, in tending the garden, caring for the animals, and helping John with the ranch work. She learned to live with the consequences of her actions, and gradually, her grief shifted from anger and regret to quiet reflection. John, too, carried the weight of what had happened, but he focused on what he could control: the present, the ranch, and the fragile thread of their relationship that remained intact. The wrong grave, the misplaced mourning, became a quiet lesson for both of them. It reminded them that life is unpredictable, that mistakes have consequences, and that grief does not always follow logic. But it also taught them the importance of honesty, courage, and facing the truth, no matter how painful. As the years passed, the Harper Ranch continued to thrive, not just because of the land or the animals, but because of the hard lessons learned by those who lived there. John and Martha, scarred by the past but strengthened by survival, found a cautious peace. Their lives were no longer simple, no longer carefree, but they were real, grounded in truth, and shaped by the choices they had made. And every now and then, when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the fields, John would walk to the hidden clearing, pause for a moment of quiet reflection, and remember the storm that had once swept through their lives. It was a memory tinged with sorrow, regret, and even a measure of relief. They had faced the impossible, survived the consequences, and continued onward. Life had changed forever, but it had not ended. In the end, the Harper Ranch stood as a testament to resilience, to human frailty, and to the possibility of forgiveness. The love between John and Martha, tested by betrayal, anger, and tragedy, endured in a new form, one built not on innocence, but on honesty, courage, and the willingness to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be.